function. You can see it here. So the first step of this demo, we're going to invoke the function certinfo s3, passing in a host name. The gateway is going to forward that to the FaaS Lambda provider, which is then going to call and invoke the AWS function, passing in that input. The function code is going to open a connection to that host and try and do a TLS handshake. That should be successful, and then it will grab the first certificate in the chain, and store the details of that cert in a bucket called QCon 2019. And then in step 2, we're going to fetch that using the AWS CLI, save that to disk in a temporary file, and then cat that to the terminal. And we're going to do all these steps in one command line, and that's going to excuse me, be an example of client-side function chaining. So as I mentioned, this is all running on Kubernetes. So if we go and get the pods for our OpenFaaS namespace, you can see that we've got the Lambda provider running, the gateway, and the normal components. If we take a look at the function namespace, nothing's running there. We wouldn't expect it to. Equally, in AWS, we don't have any Lambdas running. And that bucket that I mentioned earlier should be empty. So that's empty. And we can go to our Lambda portal, see that everything is blank. So that's great. We're starting off with a blank slate. So I'll just check. We are running against the FaaS Lambda provider. So now I'm going to deploy that function. And I'm tailing the output of FaaS Lambda here, and you can see that it's downloading that image and extracting the layers. Then it's repackaging it for Lambda, uploading that zip file, creating the Lambda function. Now it's ready to invoke. Before we invoke it, let's take a quick look at the code. So the handler takes in the host, and then we want to make this handshake, this TLS handshake, so we dial out to that address. Then if that's successful, we grab the first certificate in that chain. We then transform that certificate into a string, just pulling out some of the useful information like issuer, subject, dates, and so on. Then the final step of the function is to save it to S3. And that's quite straightforward. We first of all need to establish credentials to S3 in a session. And we can either use sealed secrets, or if the function's running in AWS, like in our example, we can just use the IAM role that's associated with the Lambda. And then we just save it to the bucket here in this little function here. So that's all quite straightforward. And then the output of this function is the file name on S3. And that allows us then to chain the next step of our function, which is to go and fetch it. Okay, so that's deployed successfully. We could then go and list. We can see we've got a function deployed, but if we go to Kubernetes, we don't have a pod, which we would expect because we've asked it to target Amazon. So now you can see that we do have a Lambda deployed in Amazon. So we could go over to Amazon, refresh that portal, and you can see we've got the certinfo S3 function there. Why don't we start by executing it in Lambda? So I've got an example here. We just create some sample function. We're going to go and look at the GitHub certificate. So that ran successfully, which is great. So we'd expect that to have saved the file in S3 now. So if we enumerate that bucket, we can see that GitHub file. That's great. Now I'd like to do this in the command line using the OpenFaaS gateway, using the client-side function chaining, which I mentioned. So I've got that saved here in this command. Now I'll just walk you through the command. We create the input to the function and then pipe it into the CLI tooling and invoke certinfo3. The output of that is then captured by xargs and used as the input to the AWS CLI S3 API command, and we pass that file name in as the key, and then we save it to a temporary file with the same name, and then we finally cat the output to the terminal. So we can do this for google.com. So that's all worked. So you see the difference there is that we have no knowledge from the OpenFaaS API point of view that this function is running on Lambda. If you go here, this is the output of the gateway. You can see that the request, if I can find it high enough, down there, you can see that it got a request to invoke the function, and then it's used that Lambda provider. Okay, great. So I'm going to deploy another function now, which creates a private key and a certificate, a self-signed certificate. And this takes a little bit more CPU because cryptography is CPU intensive. So let's just deploy that function. Again, we should see the Lambda provider extract the image and create the Lambda function, which it has done. That's great. We should be able to invoke it now. So if we take a look at the code very briefly, we can see that this function has got a README file, and as an input it accepts this CSR. You've got a host name, a key size, and this very handy Unix epoch for when the key should expire. So if we just go and invoke that, so we're going to ask for example.com you see it is taking some time. So I don't know if you can see my command line output. That took almost 5 seconds. So we're going to come back to that in the next example and see how we can speed that up. Okay, great. That's all I wanted to show for this example. So just a quick review. What we've shown is how you can use the standard OpenFaaS container-based functions and the normal CLI tooling and the gateway. When you invoke the function, deploy the function, instead of targeting Kubernetes, it targets the Lambda execution runtime. And in our example, we did some client-side function chaining.